How do we really change our anxiety response? We didn't choose to feel this way in the first place, it just kind of happened. So can we actually change it? Well, it turns out we can, and the solution is probably much simpler than all the other things you've been trying. I'm Tim Box, I'm a mind coach, anxiety therapist, and for more than a decade now, I've been working one-to-one with clients to help them overcome all sorts of anxiety-related issues. And pretty much every client I've seen over the years has come to see me because they are in some way dissatisfied with the way they feel. They feel excessively anxious and they really don't want to. The reason we might seek help for this sort of thing is because our feelings very often feel completely outside of our direct control. Put simply, we don't just choose how to feel. If we could, none of us would ever feel anxious, right? We'd choose to feel happy and content. We'd never be in a bad mood and we'd never let the words or actions of others upset us. But sadly, of course, that's not the case. Now, unfortunately, our emotions are subconscious responses, not conscious choices. They feel like things that happen to us rather than things we actively do. And at this point, you might be thinking, if anxiety is a subconscious response, doesn't that mean the process is outside of my conscious control? Which means I'm just stuck with it. Well, firstly, no, we're not stuck feeling any specific way forever. That just doesn't happen. Our thoughts, moods, and feelings are transient and never simply stay the same at all times. These changes occur entirely naturally based on the situations we experience from moment to moment during our daily life. For example, if we receive a compliment, we might feel good. And if we get criticized, we might feel bad. In those instances, we're simply reacting to what happens to us rather than consciously choosing those emotions. So even though we're not stuck, we're still in that position of being kind of like a leaf on the breeze, simply being blown wherever the wind decides to take us. If our emotions are dictated by external events that we have no control over, then that means we have no control over those emotions. Instead of getting to decide if we feel up or down, life just decides that for us. But here's the good news. While we can't directly choose our feelings, we can change them. And we do that by consciously shifting where we focus our attention. It's a very simple truth that we experience life through certain cognitive filters. We don't simply receive the sensory information that life serves us up like a blank slate. Each of us has already experienced a vast number of situations and learnt billions of things during our time on the planet, thanks to all the information we are constantly receiving via our 5 senses. This means that we have certain beliefs and expectations about what might come next and what each new experience actually means. If we go back to the example of receiving a compliment, someone who feels a good level of self-esteem and is happy with who they are might receive the compliment with joy. Someone who feels bad about themselves might take the compliment as an act of pity or even sarcasm, causing them to feel even worse. This means that how we feel is less about what happens and more about how we perceive what happens. And here's the point of this. The one thing we do get to choose in this whole process is what we decide to focus on. If you've seen some of my other videos, you'll know I often advocate making the active choice to only focus on the things that are in our direct control, which is basically limited to our own choices and actions. Everything else is outside of our control. So if we choose to focus on things that are outside of our control, like what other people might think, say, or do, or what external factors might go wrong tomorrow, then we are inevitably simply amplifying our awareness of things that we cannot influence, and as a result feeling less and less agency in our journey. This of course leads to a higher level of perceived threat from what might go wrong in the future, and a greater degree of anxiety. Put simply, as far as our perception and thus our emotional responses go, what we focus on grows. So that sounds simple enough, right? Just focus more on the things we can control and less on the things we can't. Easy, yeah? So the problem here is that even though we might try to ignore the things that are outside of our control, very often our mind seems to be demanding that we focus on them. And your subconscious demands your conscious focus by creating the emotion of anxiety. Anxiety's job is pretty much just to point you at the next most important thing on the agenda. Sometimes it will do this in a way that's pretty easy to just ignore. It's little more than a passing thought about something you need to do at some point today. No great level of distress there, just, hey, remember to do that thing at some point. And what your mind deems to be important is, generally speaking, based around the continuing quest to find happiness in some form. If something in our life is impeding that happiness, or some action needs to be taken to safeguard it, then you can bet our subconscious will create some level of anxiety and grab our attention about this. But in the midst of this process, it needs to keep you safe. Safety is a huge component element of happiness. We can't feel happy if we don't feel safe. So whenever the next most important thing that anxiety is trying to point you towards contains some perceived level of threat, then potentially anxiety levels are going to get high enough that they seem impossible to ignore. Now we're not just anxious, we're fearful, and simply choosing to focus elsewhere doesn't feel like an option. This is why, when we're feeling super anxious, simply trying to focus on something else doesn't seem to work. It's like noticing there's a bear in the room and someone tries to calm you down by saying, just ignore it, it'll probably go away. There's a bit of you saying, I think I really should be concentrating on the bear right now, because from my understanding, it seems to represent a very real threat. So it won't surprise anyone watching this video right now who has experienced high levels of anxiety that simply trying to distract yourself seldom works. Well, there's actually something far simpler and more powerful than distraction, and that is education. As far as getting your subconscious to react differently to the current situation, understanding is the antidote. If you're on this channel, then I can pretty much guarantee that whatever it was that originally caused you to feel anxious, the thing you're now most anxious about is how anxious you feel. And it's the fear of anxiety itself that perpetuates and exacerbates our anxiety response. Disarming that fear is how we get back in control of our anxiety and get back our agency in terms of choosing what we focus on and what we don't. When we can do this, we can start to get control of our emotional responses, and it all comes from relieving your subconscious of the idea that anxiety is any threat to you. I'll often hear clients say, but anxiety is dangerous. It can cause mental breakdowns. It can ruin my health. I've heard of people being sectioned thanks to high anxiety. In many instances, the fear isn't so much how we feel right now, but where this might lead in the future. And this is where we need some perspective. While anxiety is a normal and sometimes overwhelming part of life, and anxiety issues are very common, actual breakdowns and severe consequences are actually extremely rare. If we're to believe the statistics, somewhere between 20 and 30% of people will at some time in their life experience an anxiety issue. Bearing in mind, these stats simply take into account those that report the issue and are prepared to share the information, we could estimate the percentage is actually much higher than that. That represents a huge number of people. Of that number, only a tiny percentage actually get to the point of complete breakdown. Not only that, but nearly all of those people are the ones that didn't seek help or simply failed to change their lifestyle for the better when they clearly needed to. What this means is that the very fact you're on this channel looking for anxiety help probably by default instantly lifts you outside of the criteria of someone who is leaving themselves vulnerable to complete mental breakdown. Basically, you're taking action, and that means you're caring about yourself enough to safeguard your long-term mental health. And I get it, thanks to Google, it might not feel that way. When you search something like, can anxiety harm me? What pops up? The extreme cases, the horror stories. But always remember, that's because the internet values articles and posts that get engagement and clicks. Inevitably, these are going to be the ones that make us afraid. Fear is a big driver when it comes to motivating interaction and engagement. We feel like we have to click on them, and thus the algorithm promotes them even more. That in turn also encourages anyone posting about mental health to cover the scary stuff rather than the benign, because that's what gets the clicks. A lot of people comment on my videos saying that I should have more subscribers, and one of the big reasons I don't is because this channel is all about calming your fears. I don't post stuff designed to scare or alarm people. I prefer to help people by telling the truth, and the truth is much less dramatic than that. The truth is that anxiety itself doesn't harm us. It's our fear of anxiety, the way we treat it as some looming threat that creates an issue that otherwise wouldn't be there. Okay, so here's how all this ties together. Your anxiety response is driven by your subconscious focusing on what it believes to be a threat. When you believe that anxiety itself is dangerous, your subconscious will keep focusing on it. But When you teach your subconscious that anxiety is just an emotion, not a threat, it no longer feels the need to keep directing your attention there. Then, any attempt to focus on things that are not so anxiety-inducing starts to feel much easier. Put simply, when you lower the perceived stakes of feeling anxious, you naturally stop focusing on it so much. And when you stop focusing on anxiety, you stop creating so much of it. Remember this, no matter how anxious you feel right now, your response to anxiety can change. It all starts with changing your understanding of what's happening. Anxiety isn't the enemy, it's a signal that becomes quieter and less overwhelming the less you fear it. It's not about fighting your anxiety, it's about teaching yourself that you don't need to fight it. That's how you change your response and in turn, how you change your life. If you're finding my videos of value and they're helping you get a better degree of control over your anxiety response and your emotional well-being, then you might want to check out the members area. For just £9 a month, you get exclusive content, including my control system self-hypnosis method for changing your own patterns of thought and the full Clear Your Head Anxiety Relief Program. Also, every week I go live for the members to do an exclusive anxiety Q&A. Just click the join button on the homepage of the channel or in the link that's in the description of this video. I really hope you found this video valuable. If so, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more help with anxiety related issues. But that's all for now. I'm Tim Box. Always remember, be kind to your mind, and I'll see you next time.